articulate their own feminist foreign policies. Canada, Australia, France. Hopefully, this is just the beginning of a tide that will wash over us all. And now, while we'll all talk about the WPS Act and the Civil Society Working Group, which has over 40 members. They were started, I think, in 2011 or so, and we've been very intimately involved in drafting the language of the legislation. WPS Act passed in 2017. We've all been working with the administration, the various implementing agencies, to help them craft the strategy. The strategy is actually, 8 months overdue at this point? 18. Jeez, right. October 2018, it was supposed to be released, and we still haven't gotten it. So, there are some movements, there are some good actors in the agencies moving forward, but we are waiting with bated breath to see the rewards of the hard work for many, many months and years. And now we've seen in the United States, there has been a retrenchment of women's rights on all levels. However, there are a few spotlights that we are the only country in the world to have an act codified to say that we are going to support women in peace processes all over the world. That's the WPS Act. However, you've seen the prioritization of women's rights in all aspects of the State Department. The Office on Global Women's Issues has gone without an ambassador at large, the head of the organization since 2017, January 20th, 2017. There is a nominee that was put forward, I think, in early March, but still has not been confirmed. And you've seen it in the shift from, local level grassroots empowerment to now focus on sort of women's economic development is the buzzword. So at least there is progress on that front. It's an opportunity that we've all used to engage the administration, although obviously we want to broaden that portfolio related to all aspects of women's lives. So our speakers today will discuss the challenges confronting the promotion of women's rights around the world, the challenges to the WPS agenda, but also opportunities for what our organizations, international actors, and activists can do to take up the leadership and fill in the gaps that are somewhat lacking in our government. So I think we'll start with Ursula.
Sure. So just by a show of hands, who knows what the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda is? So, right, it's a really good place to start. When we're talking about gender and foreign policy, women and foreign policy, there's a lot of different directions you can go. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, what it means, and where we're at in the world on it. So the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda was started in 2010 with 1325? 2001. Thank you.
2000.
Thank you.
Was this
dyslexic moment. We're coming up on the 20th anniversary. That's right. So it has 4 main pillars under the 1325 UN Security Council resolution. Pillar 1 is participation. Women have the right to be at the table in peace processes, in political environments, and within security apparatuses. Women have the right to participate. Protection. Women need protection from all forms of violence, especially sexual violence, which we'll get to in a minute around recent updates. And prevention is the third pillar. So conflict prevention efforts must include women, must mobilize women, and also need to be gender sensitive. And then relief and recovery. So when we're doing relief efforts, when we're looking at refugee camps, when we're looking at rebuilding after conflict, are we including the perspectives of women? And so these 4 pillars, in theory, cover all stages of conflict, from conflict prevention, mitigation, active conflict, and then recovery. And the WPS agenda has continued to grow. It's really been a global effort led at the UN. We have almost a dozen, I want to say, UN Security Council resolutions at this point, updating and clarifying and adding nuance here and adding nuance there, really trying to keep this agenda alive. As we've also seen movements toward feminist foreign policies, in Europe especially, we've also seen the move from women, peace and security into gender, peace and security, and really bringing the concept of gender norms. And so saying, yes, women as women need special protection, need to be accounted for. We also have to look at masculinities. How are they driving issues? How can we mobilize positive masculinities to be a force for peace? How can we respond to toxic masculinities that drive violence, drive aggressive behavior, and cause further conflict and violence? And as a small example of this are the civil society working group's counterpart in the UK. It's called GAPS, which is Gender Action for Peace and Security, versus the US, which is still very much in women, peace, and security. And this administration has really retrenched into this is about women and this is about women's empowerment and don't talk to us about masculinities. Which, if any administration needs to talk about masculinities. And as part of this growth over the last 20 years, we've also seen a shift from gender equality to gender justice. And so what that's looking at is not just everyone has a shot at the playing field, but really saying what are the specific things that are holding women back and what are specific accommodations or efforts or needs that can really allow women to thrive. Not just to sort of prop the door open and say, okay, if you can figure out childcare, if you can figure out, economic empowerment so you can pay for the bus ride to get to the political rally, then we'll give you a microphone for 2 minutes. But really saying, what are all those links in the chain that keep women from having a voice, and how do we really actively resolve those? So that's looking at more of the gender justice rather than just gender equality. And in this sort of moment 2 years ago, the U.S. had 2 national action plans, which Karen and others at the table have had a strong pen in drafting. We had decided a national action plan that's based on a presidential executive order wasn't strong enough because presidents change. And secretaries of state change, and priorities change. And so how do we move this from a executive order that can be overturned very easily into something that's codified, that's permanent? It says it is the U.S. government policy to support women, peace, and security. And that's when in it started close to 2011, around the same time as the first National Action Plan, the beginning drafting of the WPS Act started. It was finally passed through a bipartisan effort with leading co-sponsors from both the Republicans and the Democrats, with genuinely strong support from people like Ed Royce, Republican, to really push for this agenda and to say it is the U.S. government policy that women, peace and security agenda is at the forefront, and participation, protection, prevention, relief and recovery are goals of the U.S. government. What that act actually entailed, unfortunately, was no money, but it called for a national strategy that would provide, as Sahana was saying, DOD, DHS, DOJ, state, and USAID were all going to come to the table and write a strategy that would cover 4 years. Each of those agencies would then draft specific implementation plans to say, okay, if our goal is participation, what role does DHS have? What role does DOJ have, etc. It also called for more training for the State Department, USAID, and DOD on the principles of WPS to relevant staff, especially those who were being sent into conflict situations, so that they would know, how do I consult with local women? What does that look like? What are the barriers to that consultation? How can I do better? How can I elevate women's participation? How can I ensure any relief efforts that I'm doing in, even, like cyclones, situations like that? How am I making that gender sensitive? How am I ensuring that women are involved and leading on these efforts? And then also called for some consultations and collaboration, which this administration has been less than forthcoming on. And then a report, so reporting on how we're doing on the strategy. The strategy, they had a year to write. That was October. So we're now about 18 months out from the bill being signed by President Trump, which, great. We're 18 months out. They're 6 months behind schedule. Once they submit the strategy, they have another 120 days to write the implementation plan. So something I would definitely, as an action for you all to take forward, is to provide pressure to especially our Republican colleagues on the Hill that this is something that's critical and they need to push the administration to act. Given the administration is very reluctant, it's a bit of a stonewall, but members of Congress are very frustrated that they're so far behind schedule, and this isn't the only thing they're behind schedule on. But and then how this has kind of played out, just to kind of wrap up, how this has kind of played out recently, kind of back onto the global stage, to step back to the UN Security Council. In April, Germany took over the presidency of the UN Security Council, and they said, we are going to do another WPS Security Council resolution, and we're going to focus on sexual violence and conflict, and the needs of the survivors, and the need for justice and accountability to the perpetrators. It was a huge step forward in initial drafts. It really looked at a rights-based approach for the survivors, and it really looked at meaningful accountability for perpetrators, which is something we've desperately lacked. However, because the U.S. has veto power, and the U.S. wasn't interested in a fully rights-based approach for survivors, given the Mexico rule and the global gag rule, Mexico City policy, the global gag rule, they drastically watered down the call for access to health care. And so because of the fear that this Security Council resolution could lead to possible abortions for the survivors of sexual violence and conflict, it now lacks any meaningful language on access to reproductive health care, especially comprehensive health care. So despite sort of these really amazing kind of global shifts that we're seeing from Sweden, Canada recently announced they're going to have a feminist foreign policy, efforts of other countries like Germany, the expansion of national action plans globally around 1325, the U.S. and our role at the UN continue to undercut these efforts. I think I'll pause there. I had another thought, but it's completely left me. So I don't know if we want to do questions or just...
We'll do them at the end.
Well, we'll do the speakers, and then we'll take questions on both speakers at the same time.
Great.
Thank you. That was wonderful.